Hello. Good morning. Okay. Good morning to our second day of ICIDS 2024. We welcome our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Javier Páez, Vice Chancellor for Research, Creation, and Innovation of Universidad del Norte. And he's here to open this third day of ICIDS 2024. Please welcome Dr. Javier Páez.
Okay, good morning to everyone. When I read that this conference was organized by the Association for Research in Digital Active in Narrative, I thought this is the place where I want to be because I'm the Vice President of Research, Creation, and Innovation. I want to tell you, welcome to Universidad del Norte, welcome also to Barranquilla, Colombia. I hope you have a very wonderful conference here in our institution. I also want to tell you that I think that this is the first time you have the conference in Latin America, and I want to tell you that you entered to Latin America through a golden gate. Yes. Because Barranquilla is the golden gate of Colombia. Barranquilla is the place where everything entered to Colombia. We have a very large community of people from different countries around the world. We have a large community here of people from Germany, from Italy, from Spain, and also from China, from different places around the world, but also many people from different places of Colombia. It means that Barranquilla is really a cosmopolitan place. In addition, let me start by thanking the Association for Research in Digital Interactive Narrative for selecting Universidad del Norte this year host. This trust and recognition mean a great deal to us, and we are committed to making this conference an unforgettable experience. I want also to ask for an applause to the people here in the institution that is preparing the conference, including Maria Cecilia Reyes and also Juan Pablo and also the rest of the team in the communication department. The international office, they are here and they are working very hard in order to prepare everything here for everything is okay for this conference. Indeed, an applause for them. I understand this is not just a conference. I think this is a global hub for creativity and research and innovation. Let me tell you that in my previous life, I was Dean of the College of Engineering, and I really enjoy when the technology is really close to different other areas. For example, arts, humanities, music. And this is a really good place for that kind of things, where the technology meets storytelling, where disciplines like computer science, art, humanities, and design come together to push boundaries. Let me tell you at the end of this moment that December is a really good time. It's a season of joy, reflection, and celebration. As the holidays approach, I want to wish you a Merry Christmas, or simply a peaceful and joyful holiday season for you and with your family. As we look forward 2025, I hope this conference inspires us all to start the new year with creativity, purpose, and renewed passion to our work. Let's take the ideas and collaboration from ICIDS and use them to make the coming year a bright and an innovative one. Welcome here to Universidad del Norte, and I hope you have a really good conference here. And if you see something wrong, please let me know. I'm in the 7th floor here in this building. And also, let me add something. For the people who is in remote, I can tell you that we in Barranquilla, we have a sunny day. We have the temperature is something like 30 degrees, and I wish you can be here next time. Thank you very much.
Okay, so our keynote for today is Irene Lema. Irene is a Colombian expert in cross-platform and expanded reality in Latin America. Her expertise includes digital and new media. Her work has been showcased at prestigious international festivals, including South by Southwest in Austin, Red Sea in Saudi Arabia, and FIXI in Cartagena, Colombia. She has been a fellow at the Sundance Institute Interdisciplinary Program and has received several awards, such as the Transmedia 2019 and the Documentary Creation Award 2010 from the Colombian Film Development Fund, as well as the New Media Fund from Pro Imágenes Canada Media Fund 2017. She has been a speaker at multiple spaces like the MIT Dog Lab, Worlding Initiative. She has a background in filmmaking and animation with diverse experience writing, directing, producing for film, TV, and major media. Irene is particularly interested in the intersection of narrative, technology, and global change. Welcome, Irene.
Thank you and welcome, and thank you for having me. And it's great to know this space exists. So I'm going to show you today. When I was invited by Maria Cecilia to this space, we discussed briefly what could be my approach, because I do not come from the academy and I hardly have the time to think, to analyze like these things we just do them. But what I felt was really interesting, and was really interesting also for me, you know, to see backwards, was not only the way that the end user interacts with the narrative, but also how the real world interacts with the story, you know? And that's exactly what I would like to talk about, it, like how in practice, the reality shapes the things that we imagine that we're going to do, just as just happened, but also is like how we are also fed. We usually think like how the end user is going to interact with the experience, how is this going to be absorbed by the other one, but actually I believe it's the opposite, you know, it's like we are the ones that are fed by the story, and the story itself, in the particular case of Elbit, I really feel that it's a living creature by itself that had many people involved in the process, and it was like really how it changed in the interaction with reality and the different actors. So that's the point of this. So you will understand along the road the name of this space. Okay. So when I was checking the old notes, I found that this was a premise that I had written like at the very beginning. It's like, is it actually possible? Not possible it is, but for me, to build a narrative that it's wide enough that I can easily adapt that for a different format. I have been working like with cross-platform, transmedia, whatever for a while. So for me, it was like just having one story, or not one story, one narrative that I could shape into different formats. So what you see here in this image is the full installation. We did that in 2023 in the Cinematheque in Bogota. You cannot really see it, but this is a chair, just to give you a sense of the scale of the space. This is an image that we captured from one local musician from the town of Palenque. We used volumetric capture, and we converted him into point clouds. And these are like this is the design we made for the VR part. I think it's exhibited here, like the VR experience. So we created like this interactive installation, and in here we have a couple of instruments that people can play and interact. We also had the film that is screened there. So this was like the full universe we imagined, like on space. We've had it in different locations, but this was like the first time that we managed to put all together. So briefly, the story is born in the town of Palenque, that is just a couple of hours from here. It's a story, how we like to call it, is a story about music, rebellion, and resistance. We essentially use like the oral tradition from the Palenquero people, the stories they told about their own story, their own history, and we developed this into a cross-platform project with different components. It essentially stages, for the people that is not from here, the beginning of the African diaspora in Latin America. And this is a living project, for our surprise, that is still like roams around the world. It's like last month it was in Korea, and it was also in Frankfurt, and it was also like a couple of months ago in South Africa. So for us, it has been also really a surprise how such a local story takes different shape, like in different hyper-different local cultural context. So the question for me, as I was saying, is like, how is the narrative and form, like the question that I have now, is how the narrative and form transformed by interactions with technology, the production challenges, and the voices and minds of the, in this case, the rightful owners of the story, because this is the story of Palenque. And how does it also change the end user experience? And the key question that I was saying is, what question arise about inclusive design and creation involving technology? This is not something that I'm going to answer now. This is a question that I'm asking myself. So in brief words, to make it more concrete, what Elbit has. So we have a film. The film was screened by the first time in the Cartagena Film Festival here. It's a linear film, it's a medium-length film, but it's also an interactive film. It essentially tells the story of the escape of Bencos Viejo. Bencos Viejo is like the icon of Afro-descendant rebellion. And he runs away from Cartagena, and he founds his own town, but this is part of all the connected history in Latin America of African made slaves, and then they run away and they created their own spaces. And at the same time, it tells the story of his descendants. So essentially, we have here the same person that was in Point Clouds, that is like the traditional Palenquero master. We wanted to tell his story. We managed to finish the documentary just before he died, so he managed to see his own story. And the person here, it's like the next generation of people that is now a more or less known musician that plays also with the tradition. They keep till today like lots of the musical traditions, that's the core of the thing, but also language and all that. The other part of the story is the VR. I will develop this a bit more, like in this space, but essentially this is more like our free creation about the stories that we had heard. So this is a dreamlike journey from the coast of Senegal. We assume it was Senegal, somewhere West Africa. And it followed the route of the enslaved African men during the colony. So this is an immersive experience, and we use the natural Palenquero actors. So for instance, this is a drummer from Palenque, of course. And we inserted these actors in a symbolic and dreamlike universe. So we use point clouds, we use 3D modeling and tilt brush, and some other Unity tricks. And essentially, this is the beginning of the African diaspora. And the final part is Marimbola. It's a physics installation. We imagined from the very beginning, when we started exploring the VR experience, a location-based experience. We felt that it needed a space to host it. So Marimbula, it's the one that changes the most, of course. Depending on every space, Marimbula has had many different versions, from this one to the other image you saw. And essentially, this is an interactive installation. We have the marimbula, that is the traditional instrument, and it triggers reaction in the space using sound from Palenque, using music, and also we played a lot with this universe we build with lights and shapes and that kind of stuff. So I try to let you know like a bit how it evolved. I made like this timeline when I am showing you like how the initial concept evolved and how it was transformed. So at the beginning it was born as a documentary series. We were filming a documentary in Cuba about a musician from Cuba. It was interesting. But both the sound woman and me, I was the camera woman, we were really wondering like, okay, this story has been already told. Buena Vista Social Club already exists, you know? And what about what is happening right now with the musical culture in Colombia? If you had the chance, it's not always easy to find, but I would recommend to explore a bit like the music from Colombia because it's quite interesting. So we really wanted to explore that connection between like the contemporary music that was happening and the traditional culture that it's part of. This happens in many different shapes along many different stories. It's like, how do we go back to the origin? So I found this, that was probably like the first super early initial concept of what we wanted to do. So I wanted to share that with you because I thought it was interesting to find it. So essentially, it says, we imagine a place, a sound place where everything could happen, absurd as our own country, a chaotic place, tropical, vertiginous, I don't know, and dissonant.
Donc voici maintenant Systema Solar de Colombie.
So yeah, as you see, it was just some pieces, some chunks of the thing, but that was essentially what we had in mind. Let's explore this musical world. And we ended up meeting, like selecting one of those musicians that we essentially explored like everywhere, like in different cities of the country. And we ended up working with this group that is called Jacobeles and La Mamba Negra. And they're from the city of Cali. And there were many coincidences happening here. So we were before in the town of Palenque, and we both agreed that we wanted to explore this intersection between that. So we did like the first shooting in October of 2018, 16. So it has been a long story, as you can imagine. So that essentially was just like to check how it was going to be, having an idea. And what I also found this image that I think it's very interesting because from the very beginning I imagined that it was going to be in different platforms. So I am surprised that at the end, of course it changed, but we still have the digital part that is key. We imagined TV, we actually went theatrical. We had live that we imagined more like musical, but it ended up being this blend with a location-based experience and the VR part. So it was, at the end, everything there from the very beginning. And then I'm not going to show you all of this, but just a little bit. Because then we start, like the VR part kicked off, and we had, the VR part kicked off, and we had an initial grant from a fund, a Colombian Canadian fund, So in this part, you will see that we were quite obsessed with the technique. You know, it's like we were like, okay, what if we use chroma? Is this working? How is this read by the point clouds? We actually had like to create like our own volumetric capture system because the ones that existed weren't good enough back then for what we needed. It was really, we were actually trying to generate like a tracking system to film like these point clouds and being able to move them because we had like a really small range. And we were confused back then about what el beat was, and it kept like that. So this is why it was dust at the very beginning.
Y ese es el comienzo.
Una experiencia que nace en el sonido, teniendo como referente la música y el encuentro musical. Tenemos agarrado al espectador por las orejas.
We also did some testing, like with subwoofer in the body of the user, and yeah, many different explorations. We used many assets at the beginning. We explode the computer with too many things, all the things that you have to go through when you're learning.
El mayor reto del beat era incorporar personajes capturados de manera realista en un entorno virtual.
A lot of 3D printing. Our researcher was obsessed with 3D printing, so we also did a lot of that.
Luego desarrollamos un mecanismo para incorporar estas capturas en plataformas de desarrollo de videojuegos. Finalmente desarrollamos algunas herramientas para limpiar las capturas, por un lado, y segundo, para convertirlas en algo más maleable, digamos, y psicodélico que fuera consistente con la estética que queríamos.
So this is important because someone asked that question yesterday, mentioned that in some presentation, is like how the technique actually like nourishes what you can do. It's like we were clear that we wanted to do something immersive, but when you start saying like, okay, I can create these effects. Is this exploding? Is this vanishing? Okay, how I am actually going to navigate the space? All those different things that started to give a shape. And then we had there was another small grant that we used to finish, and we were like in our first market here in Colombia, the Bogota audiovisual market, that is the biggest one here. And that was, for me, the moment when it was clear that we had to stop dreaming. You know, like, yeah, this is interesting, but we will never going to end this. We don't have a strong culture of research and development in Latin America. We have the thing that many of you probably have found in different spaces, that is like everyone wants you to show them something new, but they want you to show them first how is it going to look and how is it going to be. So it was really difficult to find. People found it interesting, but it was really difficult to find someone that was willing to invest in you developing something like that. That I can bet is not new for you, but it's very strong here in Latin America. So this is a moment when I really take a moment, like in the narrative, when I step back and I just let the development team to keep doing research and that kind of stuff, to really focus on how are we going to finish this. So the technical director went to Korea and he developed then, just to show you how it looks, like the marimbula thing. So just a brief video of how it looks. So essentially he played, this is the marimbula, we used like a new marimbula. And the resources that we have here are the things that we had created like during the development. So yeah, essentially by now we have like the 3 legs that we wanted for the table to call it somehow. And then down to earth, it's 2020 and the world changed for most of us. It was like COVID and another things like inside our team that was really, we had to stop for a couple of years to finish other things. But after that, I don't know if as for many of us, what would have happened if COVID wasn't there, if we would have kept exploring and developing or doing something larger. But when we were back, it was really like, okay, we have all these tools, let's wrap it up, you know? So that's probably why we have like shorter formats in our final version. So I essentially like wrote the final script that was a fiction. I will go a bit further then on how this was scripted and so on. And just to show you how it looked like the final, this is the trailer for the linear and interactive film.
Entienda que usted no sabe que tabalá significa tambores de guerra en lengua bantú.
¿Será posible que el gran venco tan a fondo más muerte?
El lumbalú no se usa para fiesta. Nunca el lumbalú ha practicado. Un respeto que tiene el lumbalú.
Pero vos están elegir más muerte, sí.
Thank you. And so that was like the final version, and we had the chance to screen in Cartagena. It was really meaningful for the project because, as I mentioned, Cartagena was the place where the Africans were brought and spread like through the South African subcontinent, to call it somehow. And in this space, this is the clock tower. That was like the biggest screening we have. And in the back, you cannot see here, we have this the statue of one of the Spaniards that were like the leaders of the city, so on. So it was really beautiful, actually. Someone made a note about that when we were like finalizing, you know, like the screening, that everyone was giving back to the Spaniard and looking at the story of Palenque, and there was this Palenquero people like singing and telling their own story. So it was really, this was a moment when I heard from the people from Palenque that they were really feeling that their story was being validated. And it's only like 2 hours distance from Palenque or something like that. And then we kept on doing the work for the VR part. We finished it and we premiered it like in South by Southwest. And as I was saying at the beginning, we had like the full experience that same year in the Cinematheque, like all together. So yeah, that was like essential, like finishing it. But then we had, as I told at the beginning, we've been like roaming in different spaces, and for us it has been a surprise. For me it was really clear, like one moment that I really remember was in South by Southwest. It was interesting to see, for instance, I don't know, Japanese people dancing Palenquero music. It's like, oh, okay, cool, they like it. But at the same time, it was interesting to see there was a guy from the Sioux Nation in South by Southwest, and he saw like the VR experience. For those of you that maybe can see that here, it's like really dreamlike and really symbolic. It's not really like, I have a story here. And he took the headset off and he was like, oh yeah, it's exactly the same story from my people. I understand this, you know? So for me, it was really powerful to feel that really this story of resistance it's a story that repeats along the world, and it's a story that everyone that has been part or somehow is connected with the story can feel represented. So for me, really, like the final part of the interaction is like once you finish it, it doesn't belong to you anymore, and there are like many different interpretations of the thing. So this is a narrative space, so I will talk a little bit about how I build a narrative that was not only but part of my work in there. So for me, like one reference was this one. I actually never saw like the full experience, but something that came to my mind when I started doing the work was I do come from film. I do come from, especially from documentary, that's where I've worked the most. And the concept between all these sub-concepts that we use in this universe that I use the most is XR, you know, expanded reality. And I do that probably because I come from documentary, from nonfiction. But what I really like is this idea of exploding what you have, you know, like doing something else. And I believe that somehow that's something that connects many of us. It's like there are so many possibilities out there, and there are so many things that I could do. And in general, I can see that in the bottom, everyone has like a larger objective than just telling a story, you know? So when I saw this, I realized they explained that this was developed in this university. They had this self-contained world in this whale. That was the concept that they created. But they said that when they were doing it, they had a team of filmmakers and they had a team of gamers. And it was super clear that the filmmakers were really controlling about the story. You know, like I want to know what to do, and I want to know what's going to happen and how it's going to look and so on. And for the gamers was exactly the opposite. It's much more like free and open. So for me that was the challenge, because for me the hardest team to communicate with was the developers, you know, because many things I felt that they didn't really connected with it. So for me, well, like I really have to start changing the way I think, you know, to make it easier for them to connect. So that was more like a working way reference. And I also, the other influence, of course, was the oral tradition from Palenque, and also the way because we work with natural actors, so the way they were shaping the story like themselves. So how did we scripted this? How many scripts? As much as you need, with as many people as you have, as many versions. We really navigated many. Of course, the first thing that I use coming from filmmaking is traditional literary script writing. Then I started changing. I remember this book that has like 2 words and it's written in 2 inks. So I started, because we have a and B side. So I started writing it in 2 inks, and then the interactive in another ink. So it started like having colors and nourishing. But for instance, I've also worked like with animation. So I used storyboarding, because many of the actors we used, as I said, they were natural, but they don't read, you know. So it was very important for me that they not only imagined their character, but they understood what was happening in the space. So I used, for instance, these 2 resources that I think both of them were super useful. I'm showing here like the final versions because we went through many different things. We built like interactive HTML that I think it's not new for most of you. So I started like having the first like navigation trees with that space, and I also, this ended up in being like the final version. This is like the web version, and for instance, you can see here we're in this space. So it's like the landing area. And of course, we simplified many things along the way, especially like considering what we had. It was the material, and then I built the structure, and not the opposite. And of course, the most important thing for those of you who have worked with VR, it's not new, but for those that are not familiar, like the most interesting part for me, coming from traditional storytelling, is the Z-axis. You know, it's like we have like time, and we have the characters and the events, and then you have the narrative curve. But then you have C, and it's like, whoa, what do I do? I was confused. It literally took me a couple of years to really be aware of the space also as a narrative quality, you know. And at the beginning, we used essentially the same structure, like fishbone structure. And what we imagined was like people navigating. This is what we had, the location-based experience. But this is impossible with a headset. You know, it was more like a mixed reality thing that we understood later on. But yeah, this was how we imagined. We later on the production process, we said like, okay, we need to finish. Let's not have 10 different versions, but just one. But I am surprised when I see it backwards, but that anyways we kept this. We don't have the trigger, we don't have someone selecting things, but we kept this idea of people navigating the story through the space. And I finally went to a very simple version that I managed to. That was my biggest achievement with the developers, because they read the story and they understood what it was about, but it wasn't some way to communicate. And it's like we had designers. It's a really wide group, but especially with the developers, like where are the actions and so on. So I finally had a super simple version of this is what you have to do. That was when we finally managed to have all a clear connection. So description, what is happening in the audio, and a very, very simple instruction of what is going to happen. As usual, the shortest, the better. And this is, I don't know if this concept exists somewhere. I think we coined that in our production, but I don't know if someone uses that. That is essentially like a sphere board. You cannot see it pretty well here, but you have the top view and the perspective view. Of course, this was more like at the end. This was more like for post-production finalizing it, because we already had like all the assets. But it's essentially just like showing how are movements going to happen, what's the stage light or effects, for instance, here. And then we have like the sound instructions. Super precise and well, like clearly located in the space. For me, that's when, okay, we know what we're doing. This was the moment when, of course, at the end, but that was the moment when it was clear. And something that also someone mentioned yesterday, like how actually the way it looks changes that. And for us was super important, especially in the VR part, but in both. And I brought this one because this was really early. And this was really connected with the world building part, you know, like when we started doing the world building, we were like with all the team, like, how does it look? What are the rules of this space? How many people it has? Is it day or night? Is it bright or not? Do we have sand? Do we have water? So all these questions were somehow like represented here. So we heard like the initial like information from Palenque that is already very vivid and has many different things and colors. And we moved that to this space. So essentially, how are we going to capture? How are the effects going to look? And of course, how are the point clouds going to be integrated? That was the biggest challenge, to have like those different elements. Again, what we managed to do at the end was finding a way to make it look right. That was the longest thing to do. And this is not the precise look of the film. This is from photographs from the shooting, but you can imagine like how it's looking, and a lot of references, also cinematic references, you know, of US Southern histories and all that kind of stuff, but also like the icons, the graphic, all that stuff, the resources, clear from Palenque, everything like hyper organic. And I found this was casual. I found this image when I was organizing this presentation. This is a photo from Cuba in the first shooting when we had the idea. And this is a photo from Palenque. So again, it's like, yeah, you might be pretending that you're threading all this, but at the end, it's the reality, what is threaded, and you're just connecting dots, you know, along the things. So I think that was a beautiful symbol, because at the end, for me, the question is like, how are we connecting all these things with reality? You know, more like an ethical question that has been growing, you know, like, while I interact with VR or with different technologies, is like, are we maybe detaching ourselves too much from reality? Someone was mentioning yesterday, you know, about like, how are we feeling that we humans are in one hand and one side and the rest of the world and the planet is in another space. So that's personal notes. And this is the way also when we had a clear idea of how it was going to look in terms of how do we integrate all these elements. So we had this, essentially like the trick we used, that it's simple, but it's a trick that you have to find for your specific project, is the cat, like the cat for the light for the cat, you know? Like we essentially do like, you have a light and you have to follow it along the space, you know? It's a dark space and that's it, you know? That's when you have a cat and you have a small lamp. So essentially like we were turning on and off different scenes in a 360 space and with different depths. So this is how it looked at the end. And these are some images not so clear here. This is an image that we had to delete that I loved, but the other ones are still like in the final version. So it's essentially when we knew, okay, high contrast, like, and all the different like tricks that we're going to use in the space. Very simple. And also when we were creating, for instance, those are like the final. We did this at the very end. We were not fully satisfied with some of the assets. And I did this like very fast, the same way that I had to rewrite the script. And I literally did it like in 1 week, because we had something with rights that we had to change some characters. And when it's there, it's honestly, it's super easy, but just getting there, it's what is tricky. So yeah, those references were there from the beginning, and that's part of what we did. But actually, this is in my mind, right? You know, those are plants that, I don't know, from my grandma's house or that kind of stuff. And I really like this one because it's the evolution, you know, of how do you have like real things, how do you idealize how it is going to look, how do you design, how is it going to be? Well, 3D version, and this was like the final look that we had for the promos and so on. So yeah, I think that's it. If you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Irene, for such a wonderful presentation. So now we have like 5 minutes for questions. Nikki. And for also breaking stuff. Anyone? Online, maybe?
Hello. Okay. Yeah, thanks for a great presentation. So since there are somewhat similar stories around the world, basically everywhere where I think slaves were transported to, have you thought about connecting to people in other parts of the world that yeah, have similar stories maybe? Because I would find that you know, super interesting, right? With yeah, indigenous people were brought to many other places as well, and I think it would be wonderful to have, yeah, sort of a mapping and a comparison.
Yeah, there are like 2 things. First is music. That, yeah, it's cliche, but it's a universal language.
Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, that's a super powerful tool, but I think that's too ambitious, to be honest. And the second one for me was more like the developing of this story. Like people were saying, you already know the character, you mapped it, you built it. And it was, yes, but this is not my story. You know, it's like, because something that has been strongly in my mind is like how after this, and even more with what I'm doing now, it's decolonization and co-creation.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I really felt that it belonged to them, but I believe someone should do it. Yes, but I believe it should be born in the same peoples that are facing that kind of a struggle and rebellion and fights and resistance.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, in that line about telling the story of Palenque people, and you just mentioned, no, it's their story, and you brought it to life to bring it to technology, to VR, to exhibition spaces. How was that exchange with them, like collecting the oral tradition, but also the artifacts, the musical instruments, how representations should look like? That's one of my questions. And the second is, how was the moment in which, especially, like, you know, film, we have a film literacy at this point, people that is alive in this time of history, but not so much a VR literacy. So how was for them? I understand that watching the movie is more direct, and they already know what we all know what a movie is. But how was to see their story represented in VR, for example? What were their reactions?
Yeah, like 2 things for the interaction with the people from Palenque. At the beginning, not, but of course, when it was clear that the story was going to be about Palenque, they were like participating along the process and rewriting, for instance, no, we don't say this. We are not, for instance, it's San Basilio de Palenque, but they don't call it like that, like a saint, you know? So it's like, no, we're the Palenque de Bencos. So this, for instance, evolved through, this is something that they were creating. This is really alive, you know? So it was changing a lot. And yeah, they had some participation in the script writing, but not as I would do it now. You know, like co-creation, of course, has changed in my own perspective, but also because this was not planned as a story of Palenque. You know, they came in and they took the stage, so we just gave them the space. But what we essentially did, like all the stories that are there are stories that they told, but they don't have the clear like timeline of how it worked, you know? So we actually had to do like all that research. And it ended up somehow blending. I could not say like with all the community, but with the people that was connected, yes. For instance, we run a bit to finish the film, as I was saying, before the Rafael Cassiani, that is the traditional Palenquero master, died. And when they die, they talk in the film about the lumbalú. It's a traditional music that they play when someone dies. So they play the lumbalú, and they have like 9 days of duelo. I don't know the word, like of grief. And in the 9th day, they play the film. You know, so it's part of when you really feel that it truly blended like into the thing. And of course, the music wouldn't have like one person directly connected with the team was from Palenque doing the music and all the creation. It was like a friendship, you know, like they were really like supporting and it during the process. And the second question about the VR part, I thought they would be more surprised. But probably because the ones that were looking like for the VR part were younger ones. So I think that this part of surprise, yeah, that you get like, wow, this is new. I felt more, for instance, that the people from Asia was surprised about the world of Palenque, you know, than feeling that the people from Palenque was surprised about the headset. Maybe the first time, like, oh, this is cool. But then, yeah, we had like, I don't know, Embera people in Choco watching it, and it was cool to see the reaction, but it passes quite fast, you know.
And just, you were mentioning like how your perspective as an artist changed about working with communities and how you would have done things differently as a project that would have been designed as a co-creative project from the beginning. That was not the case for El Beat. But what lessons did you learn? And like for people in this room and online that that want to work with communities, what would you share as?
To be honest, this is a super important question for my work, and I work like a lot like with global change, you know, and indigenous peoples and Afro-descendant communities, local communities. And I honestly feel that we're doing many things wrong. You know, like honestly, we need to change that. But first of all, you need to involve them from the very beginning. And second, you cannot decide a story that is about them. You cannot decide what it should be. They are the ones that need to know like what they want to tell. To be honest, I believe we heard that in this. It's like they wanted to tell their story because it's not written anywhere, you know. No one writes stories about African slaves. It's not if you don't go to Spain and find the story of Bencos, you know. But and it's not also, you cannot find it in the Colombian books of history, you know. You do know about Colón, but you don't know, you know, we are called America, but we are not, we don't have like any of those references. So for instance, yeah, something as simple as like Colombia, it's America is Avia Yala, you know, for the traditional peoples here. But something that I'm strongly working on is media representation for those communities, and this is something that I'm doing now, for instance, with the National Commission of Indigenous Peoples here for communication. It's like how it is represented, and this is something that I am working on right now, for instance, with international media, how international media covers these stories, and how they never felt it's fair. They never feel it's fair, you know, and they never feel they are properly represented. And they're always the victims of every situation. So I really feel that there are many things that we have to change there.
Thank you. Well, I have something of some sort of follow-up with respect to this question. I would like to ask about your evolution as an artist. after this project? Because I've seen, well, I love the idea of the schema with the golden rule, because actually we went to converge, but as you explained, it was mostly because of external factors from you. I mean, the project evolved because it was driven by many external forces, because of the pandemic, but also because of the technical people that were joining you. So I would like to know if now you change for the next project, you will go maybe in a more controlled fashion in which you decide most of the things from the beginning, instead of this dialectic part with the other technicians. I mean, what will be your next conduction of a project?
Like, thank you for that question. It's interesting to reflect about that. First, when it comes to doing something similar again, it will take me, like, I hope, like, not more than 2 years to do that. Because essentially, for me, really, like, writing the grammar of this was super important. Second thing, I believe, as I said, this just happened like that. We opened up the space for this story to come in, because it was not the original thing. But if I would start again, and actually I was working on a small project, and of course I did it in a different way, they should be in from the very beginning. It's not me thinking what you should do, what I believe you need, and then telling you, and you tell me yes or not. It's you tell me what you want, and then we can decide what you need. For instance, with an AR project, like in a community in the Pacific Coast. And of course, all these questions about how are we representing this universe. Personally, for me, it was like there were so many stories involved that for me, I have the need to tell something that is more personal in this moment. Like, and I really like closed and started thinking like to reset, because it was really energy consuming to do this. And regarding like the way I would work, like in the future, it's the contrary. I would try not to control so much. This thing of the world building and the gamers, what gamers taught me, let the story flow, and especially enjoy more like the development process, That was the funniest thing to do, like trying different techniques and tools and just let it flow. So I believe in the contrary, I would try to control less, to let things appear, because those were the most interesting findings.
Hello, thank you very much for your talk and wonderful work. My question is related to what you said about working, of course, with marginalized communities and African descent. I'm originally from Brazil, even though I have been abroad for almost 20 years now. And it's interesting to see, I actually have been to Cartagena 7 years ago, and I knew nothing about the palenques, because as you said, unfortunately in Latin America, the education is pretty much colonial. From all we learn, or at least when I learned, I think things are changing now, and that's what I'm gonna talk about. And it's very Eurocentric, the way we learn about our history in Latin America. So in Brazil, since 1996, there is a law that is mandatory for schools, public schools, to teach the history of Afro-Brazilians. Not just from the perspective of Europeans bringing and enslaving Africans and bringing them to the Americas, but also in terms of culture, music, all the contributions of Africans to the territory, Brazil and Latin America in general, and also indigenous people, the natives of the land. So I'm curious to know, because I actually don't know, so it's out of curiosity, and since it's related to your work, and this specific work you presented here today, how, well, two questions. One, how is it in terms of policy, education policy, in terms of looking at the history of African descent here in Colombia? But also, this is the first question. The second question is about, like, if you have showed your work in other parts of Latin America, like for example, in Brazil, understanding there is this context in schools, for example, that is mandatory. And I can provide feedback also, even though there is this law, this policy in place, we know that is not working as people would like, because many teachers, school teachers, they are not prepared to teach the history of Africans or Afro-Brazilians. So it's a struggle. So I would like to hear from you, like this, to comment these two questions.
Yeah, I think
the first question is about if in Colombia, like politics and schools, if there are policies in place in terms of teaching the history of Afro-Colombians, and if there is anything or there is any discussion about that, just like in Brazil, like in terms of, in Brazil there's a law, it's mandatory, even though it's not working as we would like to, but at least it's one step, right, moving forward and changing from the ground up, how Afro-Brazilians perceive themselves. It's a struggle because of the Eurocentric education. So I would like to know if in Colombia there is any discussion at the political level or policy level in terms of including that in the school curriculum. And the second question is about you, like showing your work in other parts of Latin America, like Brazil, for example. Yeah.
Thank you. So regarding Afro-descendants, yes, it's exactly the same fight from the Quilombola people in Brazil. It's the same story. Bencos is not part of any curriculum as far as I know, besides Palenque probably. Colombia has a specific ethnic education for indigenous peoples and Afro-descendants, but it's, in that case, it's not just about the concept itself, but the quality of education. You know, it's like in general, that ethnic education is not high quality. We have, for instance, like 80 languages here in Colombia, but it's part of the work that many people is doing. So actually, that's interesting because the question becomes very relevant to the context that we have right now. This is a conversation that we're having 2 centuries later and that we will keep having, you know, but it's a conversation that is happening right now. Sadly, this depends a lot on the political interest of the government right now. Despite of the political differences, it's somehow like indigenous and Afro-descendants are in the core of the thing, and recognizing cultural biodiversity, it's becoming important. For instance, we had the COP recently, and it's like, we need to talk about cultural biodiversity because this is what actually a biodiverse country means. So that's super important. I do expect, as I was saying, that they keep developing this story because at some point, some other people has done that in Colombia, trying to enhance like this figure of Bencos just for what it represents. But for instance, what about the indigenous peoples that were locals and were all that? So this just to say that it's a super relevant conversation that is happening and that should keep happening, you know? And on the thing of showing it, yes, we have shown it in many places, but actually not in we showed it once, like in Brazil, just the film, but not the VR experience. So I think it would be cool to show it at some point in Brazil. Yes.
Yeah, just to finish my comment, I think it would be a great addition because I'm thinking in schools, since they are struggling to teach this history of Afro-Brazilians and Africans being brought to Brazil, this piece of work, for example, it could be integrated into the classroom, like your VR piece. I think it would be a great way to teach children and teenagers about the history of African descent in Latin America, in this case, here in Colombia. So it's just a thought, just like maybe a suggestion. I don't know how that works in terms of introducing it, but I think it would be a great way to introduce in the classroom.
Thank you very much. Just like I said, in case it's useful, this is part of the Ministry of External Affairs. Like they have like a portfolio of films. Okay. So in any embassy, Colombian embassy, you can ask for that for that film if it's useful.
Okay. Thank you very much, Irene. Thank you everyone for your questions. So now we're having a break, a short break, 15 minutes, and so we'll be back at 10. So we'll be back at 10:15, please.
Había otra pregunta.
Ah, pero es que ya estábamos pasados.
A tres, sí.
A tres papers.
Sí, tres papers.
Hello. Okay, so we're gonna start now with session 3. It's social and cultural contexts. We'll have 3 presentations, and all of them will be online. Sorry about the short break. I promise next break will be longer. And we'll have as our session chair John Murray. He'll be online, so we can start.
Hello. Good to see everyone again. So yeah, the first
Hello, John.
presentation.
Volumen en sala, por favor. Hello, John. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. How are you? Welcome.
I'm doing great.
Welcome back again. Okay, so John will be our session chair.
All right, thank you very much. So yeah, as said, we have 3 papers. Each paper is given the standard amount of time to present, and I will moderate the Q&A. I think we'll just roll the first video because I don't believe the author is here in the Zoom. The first paper is Interactive Digital Storytelling, Navigating the Inherent Currents of the Diasporic Mind by Valentina Nisi et al. I don't think this is the right video. Hold on. Okay, it sounds like the video is getting loaded up. Still not the right video.
Good morning, I'm Valentina Nisi, presenting on behalf of my co-authors Paulo Bala, Miguel Pessoa, Stuart James, and Nuno Nunes, the paper on interactive digital storytelling, navigating the inherent currents of the diasporic mind. The European Union is experiencing its most significant influx of migrants since 2015. In the spirit of caring and understanding human life values, we turn to storytelling as a powerful tool for communication and connection to support displaced and marginalized communities. Storytelling is a human construct that records life and lived experiences. Memories are one of the most versatile story materials. Migration reflects human movement and resettlement dynamics, not as dichotomous endpoints, but as intertwined aspects of a globally interconnected systems characterized by continuous currents, flows, and networks. Sharing memories is a crucial strategy for migrants to safeguard their hybrid identities through diasporic trauma and contribute to more socially cohesive communities, which has recently surged as a priority for European member states. And we can see a plethora of EU-funded projects that include MEMEX, the memories and experiences of migrants communities project, which was the host of this tool and these studies, but also SPICE, culture labs, and now opportunities are concurrently contributing to this research space. It's worth building on the migration discourse and how life stories play a crucial role in it. It does also address an ethical dilemma. Speaking about, or even for rather than with migrants, assigns them a passive role and tends to recycle existing narratives, patterns, and templates. Aligning with Gebauer and Sommer, we echo the distinctions between stories of migrations, various forms of self-expression granting migrants full authority and control over their narratives, and narratives on migrations, external perspectives, academic, economic, political, legal approaches detached from lived experiences. Attentive to this distinction, the work presented in this paper foregrounds digital storytelling as a tool to support stories of migration, a form of self-expression that grants migrants full authority and control over their narratives. In this paper, we present the iterative design of a digital storytelling system through which individuals at risk of social cultural exclusion can retell, share, and connect to others through their stories and experiences. We contribute to the interactive technologies and digital storytelling scholarship by presenting the design and evolution of a novel bespoke digital storytelling tool for migrants and refugees communities. We share relevant insights from this work for researchers seeking social inclusion through digital storytelling. The image here is a screenshot of the main page of a basic digital storytelling tool, which is followed by an image of an album of photographs and a person going through it. We adopt Jackson and Maffei thinking with theory, borrowing and reconfiguring assemblage, demonstrating a range of thoughts, creativity, and interventions, analytic practices. We examine the results of our study through several theories: meshwork theory, cross-border connectivity, and diasporic mind. So, through thinking with theory, we reflect on how digital storytelling tools can support migrants in their complex and fragmented realities. Ingold describes realities as a complex, interconnected actions and relationships rather than a linear movement from one context to the other. The meshwork theory transforms people's thoughts about places from a spatial location to complex interlacing development path. The authors reflect on designing interactive storytelling technologies to support displaced communities, focusing on the complex and interconnected actions that make migrations movements. They also discuss the necessity of cross-border connectivity in migrants' lives journeys. We reflect on how interactive storytelling system can support migrants' diasporic mindsets, where the places of origins and destinations extend beyond the physical locations and simultaneously create a sense of place in both settings. Migrants perceive home and abroad as a continuum influenced by memories, emotional attachments, and feelings of belongings. Our methodology started with the preparation for the study, where we interviewed with the staff of the Portuguese Center for Refugees, CPR, about integrating our research in their activities to avoid the triggering effects and re-triggering effects of storytelling, and making sure that our participants were not burdened with extra activities that the staff would not deem useful or beneficial for them. The CPR staff identified the benefits of the participants' involvement in the evaluation of the tool, because they would have shared stories and built social capital. They allow us to insert our study in their ongoing classes and courses, and express some concerns about the language barriers and the triggering effects of the stories. For this reason, the participants were experiencing and evaluating the tool in pairs. On the left side, there's a set of 3 screenshots depicting the digital storytelling tool first, a more simple prototype. You can see first the interface for writing a story based on user input that identify the location where the story is connected to, the title, a cover image, and a short text that describes the story. In the middle is the interface that localizes the story on a map of the city and eventually will deliver the story when people are located in that specific spot. Lastly, to the right of the image, there is an image of how the story is presented to the viewer. The first study of the first basic storytelling tool happened at the CPR with 12 participants, 11 men and 1 woman between 18 and 44 years old. The protocol followed a think aloud tasks that the participants agreed to do after being explained the study and agreeing to an informed consent. The think aloud let the users take on some tasks predefined by the researchers and think aloud while they are performing it. The tasks were accessing the application, creating credentials, logging in with previously created credentials, exploring the existing stories, creating a first new personal stories. We had several insights. Here, the main 3 insights that we used to rebuild the tool was first that the tool was very well received, and despite some technical glitches, the participant valued the storytelling exercise and enjoyed writing and adding stories to the tool. The second point is that the authors wished for features of co-authoring. They wanted to co-author their stories with other participants. The story would have 1 primary author that would add more additional co-authors linked to each contribution. The co-authors would have writing and reading access to the content. The third insight is that the authors desired to be identified. The user wanted, beside the image of the story, to see and identify their authors and their stringed stories as journeys. So they could follow an author's different story bits as a stringed sort of path through the history of the person. The user wanted to know more about each other, see their profile pictures, and see how they are interlinked to each other. From these insights, we developed a graph-enhanced storytelling tool, which was designed to support cross-border connectivity, diasporic mindset, and help building social capital. The two graphs views were introduced. A user graph where the logged in user is central to the node and it links with other users that are co-authors of the stories. You can see this interface down in the second row of images to the right. Then there was a stories graph highlighting the user stories as nodes, which you can see on top of the user's graph. Clicking on the tags shows the stories related to those tags, and the 3 most used tags are expanded by default. In the user stories are highlighted. You can see the second iteration illustrated on the right. We then performed a second study, which was quite reduced in numbers of participants. Only 4 participants volunteered and conducted again at the CPR center. The tasks were adapted from the first study. The main findings from the second study are, despite the limited number of participants, important to foreground the power of the graph-oriented digital tools for storytelling tools for migrants. The authors reflect on these insights, plugging text from theory. The First finding is that supporting the complex hybrid identities, embracing tension between integration and losing roots is something the graph can support. Users voice the importance of updating their profiles with data reflecting their ever-changing context and situations. This information matters to them and helps them connect and empathize with other users. Digital storytelling tools enhanced with graph functions can support the visualization of complex hybrid identities. Connection and kinship to combat alienation. Graphically enhanced interactive storytelling can facilitate connecting to others through sharing similar experiences, counteracting the alienation generated by being plugged into a new culture, context, and society. On the other hand, connections can also be grounds for friction or contrasting point of views. The tool could also be where these differences are discussed and ironed out. Collaborations to build social capital. Graph-oriented digital storytelling can inspire collaborations across the story authoring tasks by inviting collaborators, connecting, and meeting new people through co-creation. This way, the storytellers can create more affluent social capital to be harnessed for support as they settle in the new culture and society. Opportunities for blockchain and distributed ledger technologies in storytelling. Blockchain is an emerging disruptive technology with great potential to impact content creation in various fields, including digital storytelling for marginalized groups. Blockchain technologies are bound to improve collaboration, combat fake news, improve safe sharing, and personalized retrieval of content and media delivery among users of digital tools. In conclusion, embracing the diasporic mindset. Refugees longing for collaborations and connections through the storytelling tool foregrounded how memories and stories can be harnessed to boost their social capital and fulfill their needs for connection. The storytelling tool, co-authoring, and collaborative features, the graph and story journeys, offer an example of how to engage with migrants' cross-border connectivity and diasporic mindset. Reflecting on our graph-enhanced storytelling tool, we foreground this potential to embrace meshwork theory and support the representation of the complexities of the migrants' lives. Finally, graph features could be combined with emerging digital technologies like distributed ledgers and blockchain, combining personal stories with live news and documentary facts, offering trustful, anonymized, immutable transactions and guaranteeing transparency. Our work is not exempt from limitations, and we foreground here the main ones. A lack of co-design process with refugees. Ideally, this would have been the primary methodology that we would have adopted, but due to the COVID-19 restrictions at the time of the studies, we were not allowed to have more contact with our participants. This also affected the small sample of participants, which, although quite limited, still allowed quite an illustrative set of findings that hopefully will illuminate spaces for storytelling at the margins. Evaluation does not correspond to reuse in real-world scenarios. The testing and evaluation was done inside the CPR in a lab with presence of the researchers. The projects and the studies are set on one country, and further studies are needed abroad and outside Portugal to validate our preliminary findings. And with this, I thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please get in touch at valentina.nisi@tecnico.ulisboa.pt or paolobala@tecnico.ulisboa.pt or stewart.a.james@durham.ac.uk. Thank you very much.
Okay, next up we have a short paper. And this will be the gallery game, Locative Augmented Reality for Cultural Engagement Using Multisensory Design. by Svetlana Rudenko and Mads Haar. They have a recording there that they'll be playing, and then we'll do questions after. No questions for the previous author because they're not present, but please feel free to reach out to them through email or Discord.
Hello everyone, I'm Nandini Giri and I'm an assistant professor of human-computer interaction in the Department of Computer Graphics Technology at Purdue University. I'm very excited to be presenting our case study that's titled Applying Design Methods to Capture Cultural Narratives in Animated Content. The motivation for
We also make serious games for learning soft skills, such as gaming for peace Kusam, which focused on novice peacekeepers to learn cultural awareness, gender awareness, and communication skills, and Child Helpline, and that focuses on child helpline counselors to learn to identify signs of trafficking when talking to distressed children on the helpline. Right now we're making art and music locative experiences in augmented reality. We have 6 experiences so far. Here you see 5 of them, and we call them gallery games essentially, and that is what we consider a new genre in games, or specifically location-based augmented reality games, really inspired by artless walks during the pandemic, where we found that there was no access to art or music really in the way they used to be. There's some related the work is made through Haunted Planet Studios, which is my spin-out company from Trinity College Dublin, where we've been making location-based augmented reality games for an awful long time, since 2008 for the very first smartphones. We also make serious games for learning soft skills, such as gaming for peace Kusam, which focused on novice peacekeepers to learn cultural awareness, gender awareness, and communication skills, and Child Helpline, and that focuses on child helpline counselors to learn to identify signs of trafficking when talking to distressed children on the helpline. Right now we're making art and music locative experiences in augmented reality. We have 6 experiences so far. Here you see 5 of them, and we call them gallery games essentially, and that is what we consider a new genre in games, or specifically location-based augmented reality games, really inspired by artless walks during the pandemic, where we found that there was no access to art or music really in the way they used to be. So today we're going to be talking about Jerry Hahn Art AR, which is the last most recent in the series. It's set in New York City in Central Park, and features music by Svetlana Rudenko and myself, and of course art by Jerry Hahn. There's some related work in this space also, which I'm not going to have time to talk about, but it's in the paper. The game can be played in stage locations or in random mode. So if you're in Central Park, play it in Central Park, press that button. But if you're not in Central Park, you can play it anywhere in the world. If you have another park, you play it in random mode, and the game will stage itself to where you are. It has 4 gameplay modes. The map shows you where you are and allows you to orient yourself. You see the purple area shows where the art music encounters are. Notice that we don't mark them specifically, so because that would be boring. Instead, you have to use the second game mode, which is the radar, to find and capture these art music encounters. So the radar works like a naval radar. You find yourself in the center always, and it reorients itself with the handset as you move around. Once you're close enough to an encounter, you can see it switch to augmented reality view mode, and you can see the artwork floating in the air, and you hear music or speech also as you approach the artwork. And once you can see it, you can capture it using the camera button, and that creates a photo that goes into your casebook, where you'll also find additional information about the art and music captured in this encounter. So here you see a painting called In the Morning I Sit Outside, Drink My Coffee and Draw by Jerry Hahn, which we've staged near the coffee shop in Central Park, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. You'll find all your paintings in the casebook, which I'll show. also very shortly. So I'm going to show a quick video that shows essentially the core gameplay. It starts at the carousel in Central Park, which metaphorically we felt was relevant to Jerry Hahn's sort of rich kaleidoscopic artist personality. So here we go.
My name is Jerry Hahn. I am a 78-year-old self-taught synesthete artist. I see patterns in life in general, and particularly in sound and music. All sounds have color, shape, texture, and exist in a visual universe around me depending upon where the sound is coming from. It sits there like a small piece of sculpture in the air as long as the sound exists. I use this inspiration for my artwork. I sometimes use exactly what I see as a synesthete to begin to develop a drawing, and then I take artistic license and change it. I just take the journey that my sense of texture and pattern allows through color and shape. I'm particularly drawn to wavy shapes, circular shapes, strong contrasts in color. I've made pieces based on music from Sufjan Stevens to David Byrne to Du hast by Rammstein to many pieces I've done based on the music of Terry Riley, the avant-garde composer, and Paulina Loveros. And I love to hear new music, electronic music, jazz music, which I have not heard before, because hearing music is for me like watching a movie. If I hear the same Beatles piece, it looks the same. It always looks the same. So it's like watching an old movie. I prefer to watch new movies. So I go to New York, to the clubs, as the most elderly person in these clubs where everybody is like 32 years old or 28 or 26. And they put me, because I'm old, they put me right next to the stage and give me, the best seat. And my husband and I go into the clubs and listen to electronic music. My favorite group right now is called LCD Sound System. I love the fact that I have finally figured out that I am a synesthete. I did not know that the whole world did not see every sound they heard, taste everything they saw, see patterns of pain and pleasure in their body, see numbers and time in color and in space. As an example of my ability to do numbers in my head without knowing how I do it. Yesterday we were at a restaurant and Mark said, well, how much do you think it was? And I didn't look at the menu for prices, but I said it was a certain amount. It was to the penny exactly what it was. We were shopping for clothes a couple weeks ago.
So these experiences are made using a design methodology we call multisensory design, and it's based on the interaction of senses theory, which is based on synesthesia. So you may know that synesthesia is a cross-wiring of the senses, where you might have, say, pitch to color synesthesia, where you might hear a tone and identify it as having a certain color, and so on. There's many different types, and I'm not going to go into detail about it here, but that's the core idea, that we're trying to connect the senses in ways that reach other senses by audiovisual composition, essentially. So make people feel maybe a texture or a taste or a smell by using other senses. That's the core idea. So I'm going to play a couple of other music samples. Here is Nighttime in the Mountains of Utah, which we stayed in Umpire Rock, which is a sort of a textured place in Central Park. You see a little bit of it there in the photo. Here you go. Another one is In the Morning I Sit Outside, Drink My Coffee and Draw, which I mentioned earlier, which is in the Central Park Cafe. Sorry, we don't have time for more of the music, but it's in the app if you want to try it. So the idea is that augmented reality always involves a combination of sensory modalities, so visuals, audio, tactile, vibration, for example, from the handset of the device. But locative augmented reality in particular also involves sensory stimulation from the environment, such as the physical visual surroundings, sounds, atmosphere, weather, textures, as we talked about with Umpire Rock and so on. So we try to take into account these sensory additions to our AR storytelling game as essentially as a co-creative experience with the landscape, which of course works particularly well when staged in a particular location. So here is one called Confusing Pressures, that's the name of the painting, which we staged in this part of Central Park, which is a road, which we found was somewhat confusing, you know, there's lots of bicycles, there's runners, you know, there's vans, there's horse-drawn carriages, and even construction equipment, as you can see there. So we felt that resonated well with the environment. So that's an example of another example of that. Gallery games are generally well liked by players and they have promising benefits. You can see some of them on the slide. I'm not going to read all of it out to you. But we did a recent user study specifically on intergenerational play with another gallery game called Alice Dali AR based on Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And we found, you see the stats there, in particular I've underlined that 90% would play again with a different story. So we found that people really liked the experience. We also found really good interaction between the children and parents / grandparents. So they were playing in pairs with one child and one parent or grandparent, and we found evidence that they shared cultural values related to art and music by playing the game, and also that increased emotional bonding, which we found very. So that's it for now. Happy to take any questions. Here we are. You can scan the QR code if you want to try the game. It's free and there's no ads and no nasty tracking. Thank you very much.
All right. I think you can call on people and if they'll hand around the mic in the room, or raise your hand if you're in the Zoom audience for questions. Thank you for the paper. I don't know if there are any in-person questions there because I can't see the hands raised. And I can't hear the mic.
Can go for on-site, yeah.
Okay, we've got one question on site, then we'll go to the Zoom question.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. Hello? Okay, great. No, thank you so much. I'm just curious, what inspired the compositions that were included in the app?
I'd like to hand over to Svetlana, who will answer that question.
Hello, sorry for not being in person. Thank you very much for the question. I work a lot with art, and for me, it's a direct translation from the color patterns and the characters of the art, capturing the expression, and then I can translate it to musical textures. So because music language has tools, so for example, the genre could be like primitively saying march, song, dance, and then it's a mixture. So, but also the targeting certain emotions. So I associate the keys, that so like simply major, minor, but there's like C minor, for example, for Fathom, like Beethoven symphony. So yes, it's but mostly it's taking the art expression and they putting it into musical textures. So, and then yes, I prepared the composition. So, but improvisation on synthesizer, Mats Hacher did spontaneously. So that on his intuitive creative drive. So that's how we came up. Also that I admire a lot artist personality, Jerry. We are very good friends, and the personality, literally, I could perceive it artistically and musically and emotionally, and that's the charge which I expressed in music language. Did I answer the question?
He says yes.
Okay, thank you.
We have another question from Zoom. If you want to unmute and ask it.
Hi, very interesting presentation. I was wondering if you can give a bit more details about how it did work with the pair in the garden, the grandfather and child. Did they use their own devices, or how did it work?
Yes, they used their own devices, but each pair shared a device. So we gave them headphone splitters and 2 pairs of headphones. So basically they were sort of tethered together using cords, but we did this in order to make sure that they had a shared experience and that it was that they were listening to the same music at the same time and the same narration at the same time, and they saw the same visuals at the same time in the same place. So that's how we did that.
The child will right there.
Oh yeah, and we saw some interesting behavior from sort of the child would take charge of the game experience. The kids, they figured out how the radar worked, for example. That's one of the sort of small challenges in these types of games, figuring out how to navigate using the radar. Kids got it immediately, even small kids like 5 years old and so on. And they would help their adult understand how to play the game, whereas the adult would often provide additional cultural context, about Salvador Dali, whose paintings were featured in the app, and also by about Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll's book.
It was very therapeutic exchange of roles.
Yes, so the role reversal that we saw was quite interesting and helped the emotional bonding that we observed. So, but there's a paper, open access paper in entertainment computing, a very recent issue. So if you can't find it, drop us a line and we'll send it to you.
So I don't see any immediate Zoom questions. Are there any in the room right now?
Any other question on site?
If not, I have a quick question. How much was integration of the ambient sounds important in terms of the choice of headphones, in terms of like open ear versus closed ear versus sound quality for the music?
So we deliberately chose open air headphones. So not, people don't typically play these games with headphones. People just, use the handset and get the sound from the handset, or maybe they have sort of in like AirPods or something like that. But for the study in Durham, in the Botanic Garden, we used open headphones because we wanted to mix the environmental sounds with the sounds from the game. So that was a very deliberate choice for the experiment. Yeah. Yes, because as Svetlana is saying, the multi-sensory approach is that we want people to experience the location, not just the digital.
Stimulated by the smell, stimulated by the smell of the grass, the touch of the wind, perhaps rain, the moisture of the air. So this is all, stimulation of the senses from the locative environment. And then on top of that, so music and art and presence in because of the sensory, that's so input of 5 senses or 6, or how many you want to calculate.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from the Zoom or on-site attendees? If not, I believe there should be plenty of opportunities for Discord or other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
I believe we have one more video followed by Q&A, and then we'll end at 11:15 for a longer break this time.
Hello everyone, I'm Nandini Giri and I'm an assistant professor of human-computer interaction in the Department of Computer Graphics Technology at Purdue University. I'm very excited to be presenting our case study that's titled Applying Design Methods to Capture Cultural Narratives in Animated Content. The motivation for writing this case study is that in our current filmmaking trends, we are moving from a linear storytelling process to looking at more into game engines and visualization tools and identifying ways of non-linear approaches in filmmaking. But also as a researcher and practitioner, I would like to look into how design frameworks can be used in being able to leverage these tools and create content that is more culturally validated and relevant to the audience. So in this case study, this is a 3D animated film that was made in a Midwestern university, and the theme of this short film is about an Indian classical dance form called Bharatanatyam. So this dance form has its own intricacies, the tangibles, which are the more visible artifacts, but also the intangibles in how the culture is expressed through this content. The main goals of writing this paper is to link into what are some design frameworks or methods that can be applied that can empower the practitioners to be able to create media content that is more engaging and culturally relevant to the audience, looking at how culturalization or the aspect of applying elements that represent a certain culture into the whole production process, so the content is well authentic and well validated, to leverage some of the production tools and visualization techniques. So this is more for the practitioners. And finally, identifying some pedagogical insights that could lead to a better form of teaching these tools and the processes to students. So here are the core theoretical frameworks that we studied through this filmmaking process. The first one is research through design. So I was the creative director of this film, and as a researcher, I was also taking notes in each phase of the film, identifying like what are some of the critical elements that are part of the process, how I can apply this RTD method, which talks about practitioners or researchers looking at their own design practices to identify methods and processes that can push design into the future. So one of the aspects is that we were looking at a new design space. So for Midwestern students, introducing them to this Indian culture and dance form is a nascent design space that they haven't explored before. So taking autobiographical reflections and notes really helped in returning back and critically looking at how we went through the practice and what can be done better to push this design space further. It's also about critical design because part of it is we are representing a new culture in this film, but then I was the only cultural ambassador who was able to validate the content. So for future iteration, we would like to look at more aspects like participatory design, bringing in more people from the cultural groups, maybe doing some field studies. So I think this critical design framework lens really helped us in looking at how we achieved or not in this particular iteration. And finally, the cross-cultural design practices. So how culturalization was applied in the different elements of the narrative. So here is all the different pieces that were put together in the design process. So the title of the film is called Laya, which kind of translates to the term tempo in the Indian culture. So the idea is that every inanimate object in the universe has its own movement. It's inherent in it. So the narrative, instead of having dialogues, focused more on movements and transitions. So there were 4 major expressions that we tried to convey through this film. So this involves self-discovery, and then there was elegance, which is kind of a mastery of the dance. And then there's a void where the character is all mastered but finds the environment too restricting, and then comes the new calling. So the narrative had its own arc, and each event led into the next transition. And our team looked into the audio design. So we did want to just focus on one element, but look at it from a more multi-sensory aspect of how this whole process unfolded. So for the audio, again, we looked into Hindustani music, which comes from the Indian culture, and then it was fused into some Western classical beats. And since Hindustani has its own expressions, we tried to align those moods, the music tones and moods, with the narrative's own transitions. And for the character, which is really the main empowering aspect of the whole film, I was able to find a Tanjavur doll, which is a paper mesh bobblehead doll. So students were able to study this artifact, take notes, ask questions. And as you can see, the bobblehead has a very limited movements. So identifying movements that can really fit into this character. We also made the skirt of the costume more fluid, so that way it could help have a more visual appeal. And then for the environment, so this is happening in a workplace, so it involves tools and different assets in that environment. So we actually went into an artist's tool space, workplace, so we were able to study all these different tools and then take notes and come back to our studio and brainstorm on how what we observed can be applied into the film. So for technology, we used the Unreal game engine because mainly our students belong to a game design program. So they wanted to apply their skills in making this film. And we also used mocap technology to be able to take the dance movements into this animated character. So some of the main takeaways for us from this first iteration is that one of the aspects is how we can look into the culturalization practices in filmmaking. So initially, it was good that we didn't wait for a post-production subtitle addition, but rather the holistic aspect. So early, I think we spent around like a semester, in fact, in the pre-production phase. So team members had different perspectives on what this Indian dance form could look like, what the characters could look like. But then all these various perspectives started converging as I started showing them the video references of the Bharatanatyam movement, or after the workplace visit, and also the bobblehead that I had was very helpful in students to study the artifact and being able to translate it into 3D environment. Yeah. So next, leveraging real-time tools. So as this was a comment made by one of the team members, like usually a render takes a lot of time, but here we were able to bring in multiple cameras, look at the screen composition, move the assets. So this was a fun exercise for students who were mostly doing like traditional storyboarding and animatics to now be able to create compositions on the fly, and also they really enjoyed the whole process itself. and pedagogical insights. So I think for me and the other faculty who are able to collaborate in this project, really appreciate the fact that students who worked on different aspects like surfacing or lighting or the character design, they were focused on more on their own roles in the film. But once it was all put together and they watched the final screening, it was an aha moment for them. So to conclude, I think this was our first effort in looking at how there are these theoretical frameworks and how it can be related to a filmmaking process. But in future iteration, we would like to define the problem space much better and be able to also plan for some empirical studies. So as we go through the different stages, be able to engage better with the target audience and be able to collect more culturally validated data to be represented in the content. And as critical design theories advocate for more participatory approach, so that will also be one of our inclusions in future iterations of this project. So here is the conclusion, and I would like to thank you all, and I look forward to the question and answer session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that paper. We have the author here to take questions, so I will first ask if there's any in the room and then look for any Zoom questions. Feel free to message them in the chat.
Any online questions? On site, sorry. No.
If there aren't any, I will open up, and I'd like to hear more about the challenges involved in both teaching the students about the cultural importance of certain aspects of the work, as well as asking them to make creative decisions around it. It feels like there was a lot of interesting educational opportunities as well as potential misunderstandings even there. Can you say a bit more about that? Oh, let me make sure you can turn on your audio as well, because I see that. Okay, great. Go ahead.
Yeah, I hope I'm audible. So I think there was some initial kind of ideas where students, by just looking at the story and the references, they had their own kind of imaginations going around and coming up with their own different sketches and 3D models. But then once I started explaining more about the impact and the backstories of why we design it the way it is, I think they started understanding that, and then our creative vision started converging. So it required at least a semester of weekly meetings to be able to talk and discuss rather than just showing them the ideas and going about with the work.
Great. Thank you very much. I don't see any other raised hands in the Zoom. So since this is actually a topic of great interest to me as well, could you say a little bit more about your future work section on the exchange of cultural artifacts using some of your findings and results? It sounds like you're anticipating some challenges around interpreting the result of all this work, and maybe how do you also convey the context of it, and maybe even do you anticipate certain cultures having more trouble than others in terms of interpreting or receiving it?
Yeah, like at this point, I have students working with me on a few projects that's focusing more on learning and cultural artifacts. So hoping that these case studies will kind of give me a more generic themes of how students perceive different cultures. There's also plans for doing some study abroads, of actually going to India and visiting some of these animation and game studios. So that way students can compare and contrast how narratives are produced here in the US versus going to a different country and actually take part in the studio process of, like how the local narratives are getting into this production process. So that's kind of like my next year's plans, to do a few projects through research, but also a study abroad where students can actually go to India and see how the culture plays a major role in forming these artifacts.
And just to confirm, since I really appreciate that work and that sounds amazing, you are basically giving students the opportunity to participate in another culture's production, but being led by someone who understands and has that
Yes,
context.
that's
Great.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
really great work. Are there any other questions from Zoom? I don't want to hog the mic, or even in person. If there are not, is there anything else you wanted to share just in general that we couldn't fit into the paper? Things that might be relevant to those, because I know the cultural sensitivity is a major topic here at ICIDS.
Yeah, I think like as a researcher and practitioner, my own challenges are looking into some of the scientific measures of how can I make this more culturally perceptive, but also the experiential side of. There's always this balance of there's the science behind this, but also making it more open-ended and having the subjective, qualitative nature of it going on. Um, I think that's one of my personal challenges of doing research in this area, but also applying it in practice.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. So I think we're about at time. We have time for one more questions, but if not, thank you all of the authors for your presentations. And thank you everybody there. I believe you have a coffee break for the next 30 minutes, and then the next session will begin.
Yep. That's right. So that was session number 3, and now we're having a coffee break, half an hour, and let's be back at 11:45, please. Thank you all.
Hello, everyone. One, two. 1, 2, 1, 2. Uno, dos, uno, dos. One, All right, everyone, if you could please take your seats, be very grateful. We're going to get the next session started. So very excited about this session. We have 2 on-site presenters, and we have 3 online presenters. We have some wonderful talks about AI and perception and mixed reality, so very excited to hear these works. To begin, I'd like to invite up Alan Riley for their presentation, Popcorn Movie, Dynamic Narrative Feedback for Spontaneous Live-Action Video Storytelling. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you. Hi. My name is Alan Riley, and I'm a media artist working with video and social practice filmmaking. I'm a PhD student in film and digital media at the University of California, Santa Cruz, with a designated emphasis in computational media. I create participatory artworks that explore human-mediated forms of human connection, such as games, film productions, and project-based learning. This talk is about Popcorn Movie, which is a theoretical and practical framework for generating narrative movies using a large language model and social interaction. Popcorn Movie generates live-action narrative movies using a feedback loop between the improvised spoken word dialogue performed by human players and textual narrative summaries that are generated by an LLM and read aloud by players. The feedback loop between the iteratively generated summaries and responding dialogue improvised by players produces a spontaneous narrative movie with continuity. Today, I'll tell you about my motivations and approach, the structure of the system, the format and results of some early playtests, and what I'm doing next. Creative projects incorporating LLMs have faced obstacles managing narrative consistency due to the indeterminacy of the technology. Additionally, it's not clear how the behavior of LLMs will influence the process of both individual and interpersonal creative decision-making. So to explore this, Popcorn Movie employs an interdisciplinary perspective that situates generative AI within the context of interactive media arts. I take inspiration from a variety of disciplines here, including surrealist games like Exquisite Corpse and improvisational comedy, particularly the yes and concept of continuity in improvisational performance. But today I'm going to be focusing on the aspect of inspiration in the project that draws from the methods of participatory video arts of the 1960s and 1970s, which used audiovisual feedback loops and social reflexivity to explore the communication affordances of early video. And Popcorn Movie similarly examines the medium-specific affordances of LLMs in the setting of an interpersonal co-creative media arts project that similarly uses reflexivity and feedback. In its current form, Popcorn Movie is essentially a party game for making improvised narrative movies. In the game, players gather in person and make an improvised movie using a phone and a web application. Players take turns reading narrative summaries of their movie aloud and then performing improvised dialogue that continues an ongoing story, which they record with the phone and upload to the web application, where their clips are appended to a growing video sequence that's available for instant playback. As players improvise, their dialogue is transcribed and stored in an emerging script. The script is condensed by GPT-4 into summaries and non-directive cues that are read aloud by the players. The system relies on the summary improvisation feedback loop to maintain an emerging and context-bound definition of consistency. The GPT-4 system message instructs the model to simulate the behavior of a script supervisor managing continuity in an improvised film. It's instructed to never add new information to the emerging narrative, to never suggest dialogue or specific actions, but to only produce summaries that are constrained to drawing from information inferred from the existing script. The intention of the summary is to merge the improvisations of different players into a shared workpiece. And the resulting script, like this document that's produced through gameplay, is really only used during the process of play. The output, the final output of a session is the edited video sequence. I conducted 3 playtests with the objectives of testing how the summary improvisation feedback loop would affect, one, a group's collaborative process of authoring an improvised movie, 2, whether the resulting movie would show narrative continuity, and 3, whether the feedback loop was enough to guide the group from an ambiguous starting point into an experience of purposeful group authoring. For the playtests, I ran a single instance of the application that participants accessed using a mobile device, a shared mobile device. To begin playtests, I read the entire system message aloud to help contextualize what we were doing, and I typed in a 1-sentence description into the application, which included the number of participants. So for example, we are in the woods, there are 3 actors. Participants were instructed to take turns using roughly these instructions to, 1, read the latest summary aloud, 2, to record a 5 to 10 second video of yourself improvising dialogue that responds to the summary and the cue, and 3, to submit the clip in the application and then pass the phone to the next person. The playtests lasted approximately 2 hours. And the completed movies range from 2 to 10 minutes. We chose to wait until the end of each playtest before watching the resulting video to stay focused on our collaboration and the story. Players were surprised to see how smoothly their clips kind of flowed together after play sessions that were sort of interspersed with lots of reflective conversations. The summary improvisation feedback loop appeared to encourage participation. Players were initially hesitant to contribute during the first round, but warmed up to collaborative authoring once their dialogue was incorporated into a summary. The act of reading aloud appeared to bond participants around the narrative, which emerged as a collectively owned workpiece. Participants often laughed together when reading aloud, which created a positive environment and encouraged experimentation and lots of back-channel conversation around the emerging story. Excuse me. The feedback loop reflected words and themes back to the players, focusing their attention on repeated details in emerging storylines, which created the impression of narrative continuity, even though the players did not know where the film was heading. The summaries asserted the validity and relevance of each player's contributions and improvisations, even when they weren't sure about what they were contributing, fusing the details into a larger whole. Creating a feeling of narrative progression amidst the repetition was challenging for the players. However, they developed an authorial sense of purpose by collectively playing against the system, by introducing plot twists and new information to try and challenge the model. This had the effect of introducing more dramatic but thematically consistent events into the story. So for example, a player responded to another player's childhood memories of imagining goblins in the woods by interjecting that they might all become goblins. Using a fixed turn-taking order inadvertently suppressed the, I think that maybe we went out of sync with the slides there. Just to want to go, thank you so much. This is the slide that was about the, feelings of narrative progression playing against the system. So this is an example of one actor's dialogue, the resulting summary, and then the responding improvised dialogue. And using a fixed turn-taking order seemed to inadvertently suppress the reciprocal dialogue between characters. Additionally, the reliance on only transcribing dialogue without detecting visual action seemed to result in excessively introspective monologues, steering characters into their own individual stories. Summaries and cues also became increasingly ponderous. For example, how does this sudden solitude and the disappearance of familiar elements and beings shape your understanding of identity and presence within the forest? Other undesirable system behavior included cues that are overly ambiguous, such as, what do you think about what actor one just said? Or overly directive, such as, ask actor one why they feel that way. More work needs to be done classifying types of questions, identifying system messages that might lead participants to interact with each other more directly, and possibly also incorporating visual and auditory data into the process. However, all of this led to fun moments of watching short narrative movies about contemplation, which led to insightful conversations among the participants. Live interaction with dynamic narrative feedback may be useful in assisting users in understanding the underlying properties and characteristics of LLMs to support further critical and creative engagement with this technology. In such approaches, providing methods for participants to reposition their roles in relation to AI-generated content is important in cultivating critical and creative perspectives. And this will require a combination of mutually supportive social and technical practices. Particularly, thank you. Particularly, this approach could also be incorporated, practically, this approach could also be incorporated into a variety of applications, games, and social media, or virtual performance. Placing the ongoing summary into an additional loop with a database and storing important states, objects, and facts could support authoring interactive fiction as well. The current iteration of the project takes place in a live-action embodied film production setting that could also be adapted into settings based around live-action role-playing or forms of collaboration between youth and instructors in project-based learning settings as well. One thing that I'm realizing that didn't necessarily come through in my prepared notes about this that I'd love to just mention is that there's in the way that the summaries are formulated, you saw some examples which maybe you had the opportunity to read while I was speaking, but there's a very specific balance between the ambiguity and the directiveness of the summaries. And that feels like the big area of continued work on this that I'm interested in, because the intent is to really reflect back to the participants what they're doing. That of course will always be done with some bias or sort of shaping process. It's a mediated reflection of what they've all said. So crafting that kind of shared shaped summary that influences the behavior of the group is the sort of the heart of the project. As it is, I have continued to adapt this into different settings. You know, I just showed you the playtest version. I've been implementing this same technology in some other live performances. So for example, I implemented the framework in a comedic live science fiction show where I conducted an interview with a blob of video feedback. So every time I asked a question, I was given a summary of my question and then just kind of continued this absurd performance. And I also produced an additional kind of more sinister live show where the blob of video feedback is performing covert influence operations on a group trying to have a conversation about what they're trying to figure out what their conversation is about. So in addition to conducting more playtests with Popcorn Movie, I wanted to also mention that it's part of a broader project. Like I'm interested in further kind of working with this as a module of different artworks, sort of iterating on artworks that use this sort of feedback loop process. And that is what I mean by dynamic narrative feedback for spontaneous live action video storytelling. And just one more thing is that this is a link to the videos if you wanted to check out some of the playtest videos. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Do we have any from the audience? Yes.
Thank you, Alan, for being here and sharing with us this amazing thing. I have like 2 questions right now. The first one is how long it took you from the idea, you have this idea and you're going to develop, and there is like a legal term around the IP, the IP from the users, and like terms and conditions, what about, and also it's going to evolve, like, maybe like a big tech corporation is gonna be like, this is huge. Have you ever think about it? Because it's gonna be like a shady figure around. Thank you.
Excuse me. Yes, there are many shady figures. I mean, just in terms of like it changing, yes, I mentioned this in the paper that every time I conducted the play test, the system behaved differently, and then I had to go back in and sort of fiddle with the system message in my API request to get it to come back to the constrained behavior that I was looking for. So it's not something that I am like deploying at scale. The web application that I have currently is able to only run 1 instance at a time. So it's really just, this isn't something that I'm developing as a product that's going to be like deployed in a massive way. It's something that's intended for implementation in specific artworks. And in terms of the question about the project timeline, that's a great question. I should write another paper about the development of this because it was an interesting process. But to just give you the dates, I started working on this idea in the summer of 2023.
Next up, we have a recorded talk. This one is Friendship with AI, Immersive Science Fiction Prototyping for Responsible Innovation by Elke Brugger-Clay. And then we'll have a live Q&A after.
Everybody, can you imagine forming a friendship with an artificial intelligence? That was our question for the target audience in a recent science communication project. My name is Elke Brugger-Clay. I'm a lecturer and researcher at Zurich University of Applied Sciences. On behalf of our interdisciplinary research team, I will share our experiences from this project, and I will present the process as well as the technical framework of immersive science fiction prototyping, an approach that we developed in order to allow non-technical authors to write stories about the future which can then be imported and experienced in virtual reality. Why did we initiate this science communication project? Well, our research object is not exactly friendship with AI, but effective virtual companions who have social presence and interactions with a human end user in virtual or augmented reality. Our daily research business are prototyping projects and field studies with serious use cases in the domains of healthcare and education. And we explore the acceptance and impact of such virtual companions, like, for example, virtual tutors or virtual health coaches, like Rilko, you can see here on the left, who is counseling chronically ill patients in virtual reality. In order to make these companions effective, we use large language models, animations, and we also do capture sensitive personal user data, biofeedback, such as heart rate variability, facial expressions, tone of voice, to draw conclusions on the mental and emotional state of the users. Technically, every day new things are possible to make social interactions with AI more natural, more personal, effective. That's what we aim for. However, we as researchers and creators of effective technology navigate in a field of tension. We are very well aware that we change not only the way we interact with intelligent machines, but that we, by doing so, may redefine or even replace interpersonal human interactions. So how can we innovate such virtual companions responsibly? We strongly believe that the public engagement is key. So the science communication project was motivated by giving a voice to people who are affected by technological change, like all of us, and who may interact with virtual companions in the future. In the end, we as researchers build virtual humans, but what do people think about the humanization of technology? Can they imagine forming a social relationship with intelligent machines one day? Luckily, the Swiss National Science Foundation offers a funding scheme called Agora to foster such an exchange between scientists and society. And this is the reason why we spent many hours outside of our research labs in 2023 in a science museum here in Switzerland, schoolhouses and public events to discuss with teenagers and young adults about friendship with AI based on a multilinear scenario they had experienced with VR headsets. These interventions and discussions you can see here were the final step of an approach that is presented in our paper on immersive science fiction prototyping. Immersive science fiction prototyping, as we applied it in this project, implies 3 stages. Triggering reflection and a discourse about life in the future with emerging technologies is the purpose of immersive science fiction prototyping. To get to this point, we first have to create a multilinear story, transform it into a VR scenario, to make sure people have a common experience they can refer to in the group discussions after the experience. Methodology-wise, the approach is based on the science fiction prototyping technique as published and developed by B.D. Johnson. What we like about Johnson's approach is that, unlike typical scenario techniques used in the industry, sci-fi prototyping is not about predicting likely futures, but it belongs to the creative narrative scenario techniques. Johnson developed it at Intel to encourage the engineers there to critically reflect their own developments. We already had experience from teaching sci-fi prototyping to master students in business technology since 2017 in the frame of their master thesis and a module called Digital Futures. Students analyze opportunities and risks of emerging technologies, and they write twines about how they might be used in everyday life in the future. What we added over time in our teaching and research activities are 3 points. First, multilinearity to make the sci-fi prototypes interactive and to force our students and audience to think about future in alternative. Second, immersive VR to involve players emotionally and to create a feeling of social co-presence with technologies. And third, the sci-fi generator as a technical framework to speed up the creation of VR scenarios from Twines. Before I go into detail, one limitation and disclaimer, I'm not going to present a robust research design as I saw in many of your presentations in the last days, but experiences from a science communication project. Though the focus was really on active engagement with the audience, that means we had to be spontaneous, flexible, rather than rigid. And the funding was actually not intended for profound quantitative analysis of gathered data. Let's start with the story. We had to place our controversial technology in a relevant domain of life. To make effective computing tangible, we picked friendship as an extreme use case. We may be ready to chat with GPT, but the idea of being friends with an AI one day makes people hesitate. The target audience, teenagers and young adults aged 13 to 29, we picked for two reasons. This generation is known for the hedonistic use of technology. They do not limit the value of a technology to being useful or gaining productivity, but they expect pleasure from technology. And second, friendship plays a very central role in this phase of life when young people break away from family and develop their own identity. To develop the scenography and dramaturgy, we applied a three-level model. The major drivers shaping the sphere of social interactions were identified on a macro level. On a meso level, the shared apartment was defined as the immediate social context of the story. And finally, on a micro level, situations when you need a good friend were used as plot points to drive the story. This is a short summary of an intensive iterative process involving computer scientists as experts in effective computing, communication scientists and students who were involved with street interviews and challenging the twine to make sure the story is relevant for the target audience. And a visual designer was involved right from the beginning and developed personas and mood boards to be ready for the visualization in VR. Inflection points are key elements in the sci-fi prototyping process as defined by Johnson. Inflection points let the technology create tensions and present the audience with dilemmas. We used three technology leaps as inflection points. At these points, the player has to say yes or no to the next version of an increasingly effective digital assistant we call TipTop. At the beginning, the user installs a TipTop as a voice assistant on a smartphone. In a next step, TipTop is offered as a tattoo with an emotional sensing nanochip. And in Tech Leap 3, the player gets TipTop Human as a trial version of an embodied augmented avatar and can decide to keep it or not to keep it in the end. Multilinear story with the decisions, interactions, and dialogues was authored in Twine. Using the sci-fi generator, the HTML file published in Twine is imported into Unity and transformed into a C# script that then controls the story logic in Unity. The generator follows a low-code paradigm, so the authors of the Twine need no programming skills. They simply use a limited set of runtime macros in their Twines, for example, to change scene, change narrator, to look at another narrator. And coding is only required for implementing specific interactions in Unity. The chat with GPT macro is used to configure a very simple dialogue system that can be attached to any avatar in Unity. In Twine, the author can define the prompt plus parameters like the number of turns in a conversation or the temperature to fine-tune or control the creativity of GPT. A sci-fi generator is a custom-developed framework to import and play twines in Unity. We did not start from scratch. At the beginning, we used the Unity plugin called Cradle to integrate Twine with Unity, but Cradle has not been developed further after 2017. So we extended Cradle by several packages in the meantime to allow users to interact with their voice controller-free. The speech package integrates with any speech synthesis service. We used in that project Microsoft Azure Cognitive Services via API. The finite state machine controls the states of the NPCs and the player, and also the interplay between NPCs and player. And finally, we added a session manager to log sessions and support surveys within VR. Session management allows to log choices, any variable and utterances in chats of the players, so we can analyze the path and decisions users take in the scenario. VR interventions in these projects were run with 329 participants. You can see the details of the demographic profile in the paper, and 292 played till the end. Quantitative analysis was not in the scope of this science communication project, but we did run surveys at the beginning and at the end of each session within VR, not only to find out whether users can imagine AI as a friend, but also to capture attributes of a good friend at the beginning of the scenario and to check back at the end whether the player thinks that AI one day could fulfill that quality. The responses indicate that our audience can imagine a reliable and loyal AI friend, but they have doubts with respect to trust and honesty. Discourse analysis was done by our colleagues from the Applied Linguistics department based on transcripts of the group discussions they had moderated. So how did players talk about friendship with AI during these narrative interviews before and after the VR scenario? The discourse analysis revealed three dominant narrative patterns. First, the look and sound of the AI friend was very present in these discussions. We saw positions at both ends of the spectrum. AI has to be human-like to be a pleasant companion, or AI must not look at all like a human to make sure I can still recognize that I talk to a machine. Then we saw many statements about distance, about the advantages of having an AI friend who is always there and available, but also about being annoyed or wanting to switch off the AI friend. And then, not surprisingly, trust was a big topic. The young people were skeptical about privacy, but they were also attracted by the possibility to have an AI friend. They could tell secrets which they otherwise would not dare to share with human friends or with their family. We consider these insights to be useful and also actionable when we as researchers apply design criteria for developing effective virtual companions. So, in conclusion, we consider immersive sci-fi prototyping as an effective approach to support responsible innovations. We as researchers could take away actionable design criteria from this process. And the sci-fi generator, with a growing body of runtime macros and APIs, lowers the barriers for non-technical authors to transfer their stories into the virtual world. Of course, there is always potential for more. Right now we are focusing on the dialogue systems, but we would also like to intensify the collaboration with the linguistic researchers to find out more about how humans speak with AI. I thank you for your attention on behalf of the whole team. It was a pleasure and I'm happy to take questions.
Fantastic work, really exciting. And do we have her with us? Get your questions ready. Hello, we see you. Can you hear us?
Hello. Yeah.
Wonderful. All
I
right.
can hear.
Thank you very much. Questions? Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting. I was thinking a lot about the uncanny valley effect, especially talking about emotion and empathy. I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit how you keep away from it, or if you've somehow embraced it, or if maybe the participants mention anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, the visualization of the avatar of the AI friend was a big topic, not only in the VR, the people who experienced the VR scenario already upfront in the street interviews. Many people mentioned that, and we approached it in a way that we decided to have the tip-top humans, so the embodied avatar, realized as a Ready Player Me avatar. That's a kind of a low poly avatar. And the roommates in the shared apartment of the future were realized as kind of photorealistic avatars. We used character creator by Reillusion, and we could clearly see that uncanny valley effect, depending also a little bit on the specific character. But they mentioned, okay, I was kind of spooky. And I was not sure, was it a human, was it a machine? And while the human avatar, the low poly avatar, was considered to be nice and pretty. So definitely there was uncanny valley with the photorealistic ones, not with the low poly ones.
Thank you.
Do we have a question online, perhaps? Yeah? Can someone read it? We don't have a question online? There it is. Please keep your hand raised in case. Okay. The person who has a question, please turn on your camera to ask your question. Or I will have to privilege the on-site folks. No questions. Anyone else on site with a question? Yeah, Hartmut.
Hi. Yeah, very exciting work. So which evaluation frameworks did you use? I mean, you showed an evaluation in terms of trust and other things. Is it an existing framework? Did you make something sort of up for this? Yeah, maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, in terms of, you mean in terms of evaluating the impact of the scenario, or the impact of the?
Well, I mean, you had this slide on trust and other parameters. So what did you use to measure that?
I mean there were simply free text questions at the beginning of the scenario. We simply asked the players what the most critical attribute of a good friend is, and then they could respond. And at the end, it was replayed, and they were asked whether this question, this attribute, they can imagine whether the AI fulfills this attribute. So we didn't really control this. What we did apply it as a framework was self-determination theory.
Okay.
So when we designed these so-called inflection points where the players had to make decisions, we always made sure that they can kind of make a balance, what they lose or win in terms of autonomy, competence, social relatedness. That was a theory underpinning the development of the story.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, we have to stop for questions for now, but feel free to reach out online. And thank you again for the wonderful work. A round of applause, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Dreamer, the effects of multisensory design on cross-modal perception across genres with mixed reality concern. And Zhangpeng Fu presenting.
Oh, test. Okay, this works. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm going to present our work, Dreamer, the effect of multisensory design on cross-modal perception across genres with mixed reality concerts. I'm Xiangpeng Fu. I'm the programmer and second author of this project. So I'm happy to answer any question about the technique. But for any question about research, I think the first author, Svelena, as my supervisor, Matt Hart, who was the expert of this research, would have a better answer. Okay, so as humans, our perceptions is multisensory. We don't just see or hear, we also touch, smell, and taste our environment. So this integration of sensory makes our experience rich and immersive. And now the mixed reality, or MR, offer a potential to merge combine the digital and the physical world, but it still rely heavily on the audio and visual elements. So the tactile and the olfactory elements still not generally supported by the platform. So which create a gap between how impactful and realistic this experience could be. So our research was guided by these three questions. So how can we reach other senses through MR audio-visual environment? Can we create dreamlike experience and feel music and art as our reality? Music and art therapies are well-established practices, so MR have a potential to provide mindfulness. So the methodology, so you might be familiar with this slide because Matt just introduced the same thing before, but I will give another short introduction of this. So the methodology we use is multisensory design. In informal use, multisensory design is sometimes used simply to mean design that appeals to the senses. When used scientifically, it means design based on the interaction of senses theory, based on the model of synesthesia. So what is synesthesia? Okay, again, I will introduce again. So synesthesia is a wiring of the brain when the stimulus in one sensory modalities has a reflection in another. But although the synesthetes who experience this phenomena naturally only represent like say 4 to 6% of adult humans, but as the research shown, most of our known synesthetes can also experience some form of those cross-modal associations under certain conditions. That's because our brain's structure is based on interconnectivity of sensory modalities. So to make multisensory MR, we design this experience by following interaction of sense series and cross-modal associations to reach other senses by audio-visual composition. So based on this framework, we developed the DreamR series, which is a collection of MR experiences that combine live classical music performances with audio-visual composition. In these experiences, we focus to demonstrate the implementation of sensory pairing experiences to fulfill the desired targets of multisensory perception. The DreamArt experiences have variation across genres. The first genre is the visualization of classical music, which includes two experiences. So this first one is beach dreaming, which is the visualization of Beach's classical composition Dreaming. And Beach was a Victorian synesthete composer, and her music is predisposed to the strong mental imagery. In this experience, the chosen nature scene meant to highlight the. Oh, can I play the video, please? Yes. Maybe turn down the volume first. Okay. The chosen nature scene meant to highlight the sensation of touch. You are surrounded by the mist, so which encourage you to feel the mist on your skin. And with the symbolic imagery, we put the contract of the life and the death tree, which intended to encourage the audience to think philosophically, aesthetically, and scientifically. So the next one in this genre is the Rachmaninoff MR synthesis, Preludes, Opus 32 and 1, 5, and 10. Also, could you please play the video? 34, 3 more, yes, thanks. Oops. So in this one, the multisensory approach in particular manifested in the visualization of Preludes N10 in B minor, where the spectator can touch a virtual crane, as well as the leaf of the maple tree, which symbolized the philosophical reflection of passing life and experiences. And the ambient sound of a crane was also added to the music to increase the association with nature, and perhaps to encourage the feeling of the air and the falling leaves to reach the olfactory sensory through audio-visual composition. So another genre which includes the experience with music composed specifically for the art experience. The first one is the Decolonizing metaphysical art, MR. So this experience brings to life the surreal world of George Decolonizing's painting. In this experience, every object has its own music archetype and a symbolic meaning. For example, the horse is perceived by the composer Swelana as a collector of souls, and the artichoke is associated with a minor key and the orchestration with a strong oboe lead. So by interacting with the object, you will trigger its music archetype and encourage you to feel you live in the arts. And we also added an ambient sound to heighten the sensation, like the sound of wind and the sound of heavy rock moving, in order to reach the sensation of the goosebump, and the touch of the virtual wind on the skin. And in this genre, the last one is the Alice the Lee mixed reality, which was inspired by the Lee's illustration for Alice Adventure in Wonderland. We explore a multisensory approach by emotional state through key, genre, music, texture. But for more information, you can scan this QR code to access the paper we published last year, the Alice the Lee MR, a mixed reality interactive narrative experience. Okay, so we present our work as the part of live piano concert at the joint conference on Serious Game in 2023 as a pilot study. The MR headset was worn by a performer. The visual of the performer was projected on the screen. There were 38 participants were recruited, and a 10-item survey, user experience survey, was created for the study. each item was answered on a Likert scale. As for the result, there were 9 participants experienced at least one non-audio sensation. And within these 9 participants, there were 4 experienced the touch, 4 experienced the smell, and 1 experienced both touch and smell. These 9 participants represent 23.7% of the participants surveyed. This is at least 4 times the estimated proportion of synesthetes in the general population, which was 4 to 6%, which indicates that the MR can effectively simulate cross-modal experiences. Well, in conclusion, our applied study showed a great engagement and sensory awareness of participants in the music art MR experiences. But as this is a pilot study with a small sample group and a short survey, the results are merely indicative of future avenues for research. But the findings are promising. So in the future, based on the result above, we're going to explore the potential for music art MR experiences to induce multisensory experiences and multisensory brain stimulation, and to promote mindfulness and its appliance to music art therapy practices, and to promote and train association thinking for music art education. Yeah, and thank you. If you can feel free to download all the MR apps I've showed before through this QR code. And for more video, you can go to our YouTube channel to find more information. Thank you. Yes.
Now it is. Okay, great. Mods should be online as well. Thank you. Do we have questions in the audience? On Zoom? One question? Okay. Okay, never mind. All right. So I have a question for you. So it really reminded me in your results, right? The old aphorism that like seeing is believing in this instance, right? So we are, and the cross modality part is particularly interesting. How much of that do you think had to do with the physical venue? How much of the physical venue spaces were maybe impacting that in addition to the MR?
Well, I think Matt could answer this question maybe.
Yes. Can you?
Oh, everyone's here. Yeah. Perfect.
Yes. So I think this is the question of consciousness in extended realities, and honestly, neuroscience thinking about these questions, but so it's more extended studies should be. That their consciousness studies, they're a little bit struggling with terminology, what states of experiences, awake, then vegetative states or dreaming. So while we dealing with mixed reality, we actually showing and engineering dreaming in a way. So, but consciousness research coming to discuss this, but it's a very difficult subject because yes, so what we see that we should believe, but when we touch, but the power is imagination, possibly maybe even while you touch the digital flowers, perhaps it still could enhance the sense of smell, the aroma of flowers, because it's our brain that generates. So another question from another answer from consciousness studies, it's actually Anil said put that statement that so we all live in a sort of hallucination on which we all agreed upon.
Right.
So it's how we interpret real world. This is question also. And is it the real world is constructed also according to our mind? So there's a lot of philosophy and science, and more neuroscience also. But I know I passed 2 months.
It's complex. I think we need some frameworks for it. Yeah, that's about.
Yes, we do. Thanks for your question, Josh. I would just say in terms of the venue, so the venue that we did the experiment was not the one that you saw in the video, it was the one you saw in the photo where the performer was Xiongpeng, so you saw the audience there sitting in rows. I don't know if the venue really made an impact. We have only done this experiment in one venue, but the venue it's not particularly interesting venue. Unfortunately, it's just like a lecture hall, you know, sort of with a sort of layered seats in the music department in Trinity. So I'd be surprised if people were captivated by that room, because it's not that nice. But yeah.
Thank you. Any new questions? But yeah, Vincenzo.
Thank you. Well, after 2 talks now, I start to understand most of the work, but I want to just ask you something about the background of your research. I mean, I was shocked by the idea that only 4-6% of adults can perceive synesthesia. So I thought it was more of a more extended phenomenon, but usually, so it's interesting. But can you give us more about this background? Because I understand that there are a lot of synesthetic phenomena that are not really pure synesthesia, but and I'm really probably a victim of that too. So
yes, thank you very much, Vincenzo. Nice to see you. So it's actually in the structure of the brain. There's studies by Daphne Maurer at Toronto University that called infant synesthesia, so which lasts till 24 months old baby. But practically I worked a lot with young age children as a piano tutor, and they still use it till like extensively, you know, that they don't differentiate between sensory modalities. If you tell them that some imagery they could manipulate with sound or react differently, they use metaphoric language, so the mixture language. So it is in the perception, but then why the synesthesia doesn't continue only in this 4-6% synesthetes naturally, because it could be emotionally overwhelming experience, because even to open the door, synesthetes perceive it as okay, I feel the texture of the door, I hear the sound, the color is this, and the color associated with me with this emotional state, or the door is a character, there's a complex. So some synesthetes, they are positively happy because they use this their sensory for stronger memory or the creative input, but there's some negative, you know, that so impact when, for example, the child in this scenario of school lesson, the teacher said, oh, look, everybody, this is letter A, and this is yellow, and the child perceives it in red. There's confusion. So what we bring to discussion here is diversity of perception. So officially, there's more than 80 types of synesthesia registered. So there are types of sensory pairings, for example, visual projection to the skin, called mirror touch synesthesia, so which is associated with higher
My
level
apologies,
of empathy.
Svetlana. We're going to have to close here, but for
Okay.
further questions, please put them on Discord and ask questions. And one more round of applause, please.
Thank you.
All right. To close out the session, and thank you for your time, we have Constanza Freitas. I'm sorry if I butchered that. Where's the Finance? A transmedia storytelling experience to engage young adults in financial educational content. Thank you.
I'm too short for this. Okay, I think that's good. Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Constanza, and I'm here to present my work, Where's the Finance Citrus Media Storytelling Experience to Engage Young Adults in Financial Literacy. I'm a master's student, and I'm a research scholar in a games lab, and this was my initial stage of my dissertation work. So financial literacy is a crucial skill that we all need to shape our personal and economical futures. Despite its importance, many people struggle with basic financial concepts, and this problem is even more pronounced among young adults because they face additional challenges, leaving them unprepared for real-world financial decisions. Financial education has been approached in a very traditional way. You may think classroom, slides, books, but we really need to ask ourselves, is this really enough to truly equip people with the knowledge they need? So for our work, we wanted to leverage transmedia storytelling, which I think everyone here knows what that is. Also edutainment, which is the connection between education and entertainment, and also interactive media for financial literacy. So web applications, mobile apps, and so on. Our target audience is young adults between 18 and 30, because these people are at a crucial stage in their lives when they are learning about these topics, these financial topics, and also having different financial habits. So we created two different concepts. The first one is the concept A, which has the name financial frenzy, which is a more collaborative approach. So on this concept, we have a board game, which is Financial Frenzy, where it encourages collaborative learning by bringing players together in a team. Then we have Fit Frenzy, which is a mobile application, like a flashcard app. And finally, we have the social media page, where people can gather as a community and further talk about these topics. Then moving on to concept B, we have Where's the Finance, whereas it is more of an individual approach, because we have a web game and people play alone, of course. And here people can move on at their own pace. So it's a more personal learning experience. Then we have a coloring book. Since this is a sometimes anxiety-inducing topic, we decided to have something relaxing, so a coloring book. And finally, just like concept A, we also have a social media page. So we decided to choose social media because young adults have their phones all the time with them, and we chose Instagram because we wanted to use images. So yeah, that's it. Now for our pilot study, we decided to gather some initial feedback on these two game concepts, because we wanted to know if there was any difference in using a collaborative approach or an individual one. So we gathered if there was any effectiveness in the teaching of financial literacy topics. So we were able to gather 8 participants with a convenience sample, and their ages were between 18 and 30. We used Google Forms to ask some financial knowledge questions before using the game and after, and we also used the game experience questionnaire. At the end, we did an open-ended questions and a semi-structured interview. Then our pilot study started with debriefing the activity. Then we had a consent form. Then we had a pre-questionnaire with some questions about demographic data like age, gender, and so on. And we also asked some financial questions before using the game. Then they played the games, and the order was counterbalanced. So group 1 started with game A and then game B, and second group started with game B and then game A. Finally, the same questions were asked about the financial topics, and people also answered the game experience questionnaire. At the end, as I said, we had a semi-structured interview with the open-ended questions. So for our results, I have here some graphics to illustrate that. So for concept A, we can see that we have some participants. So we can see that they never had worse results after. So we can see that 6 correct, then they had 7, which was all of the questions, and then the other one stayed the same, and the other one improved a lot from 4 to 6 correct. For concept B, we can see that the same happened. People were able to answer all of the questions correctly after playing the game. Moving on to the results about the game experience questionnaire, we have good results. We can see that the flow on concept A was pretty high, and we also can see positive experience, which correlates to the negative experience. For concept B, we have, for example, competence. That was pretty high. People felt like they could continue playing the game, and they knew what they were doing. Again, the positive effect was pretty high, and negative was low. We also have this component, which is the social presence component in the game experience. We only did this for concept A, since this was the only one that was collaborative. And we can see that there was pretty high empathy levels and low negative feelings. Now for our qualitative results, for concept A, we saw some people talking about the memory cards. They wanted, they felt like they needed examples because some people didn't know what a financial consultant, for example, was, so they couldn't replicate that to their teammates. They also talked about media expansion, which tells us that our work is relevant because they want a transmedia, they want more medias. And they also had high engagement while playing, and they gave us other game suggestions. Moving on to concept B, people gave they wanted money incentives like Monopoly, where you have money to play. They also talked about links because they wanted to go back and learn even more about that topic. Engagement, again, was pretty high, and they also gave some game suggestions like having a happiness meter in the town. So after all this information, we redesigned our transmedia experience. We decided to keep the Where's the Finance name because it was the component that had more narrative, had more narrative to be developed. So as you can see, we have the web game with the main characters. There are 5. Each character has a different financial problem. And we have the cards, they have the description, the financial challenge, and also the clue. So basically, you have a map and you have to find the characters according to their stories. Then you have the web page, social media page, sorry, where you have some zoomed images of the map, and you have to find that on the web game. Finally, there's our board game, where we decided to use the same graphics as the web game, and your objective is to reach those green squares. We have a memory game, and we also have some challenges cards. We have drawing challenges and forbidden words, for example. Now, we understand that our work has some limitations because we weren't able to test the whole extent of the transmedia, since it requires a longer time frame and is also more resource investments. Our pilot study was also had a small sample of people, so we want to change that in the future. And there were differences in the gameplay because the board game had more cards, for example, and the web game wasn't fully developed. In the future, we want to continue to develop this game and see if there is even more positive effects. So this is part of my thesis, as I said, and right now the game is finished, and hopefully I will defend my thesis next year, and the game will be available to play. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions in the audience? Any questions about financial literacy in the audience? Anything online? We're waiting. That is a no.
They want to have lunch.
Everyone's a little hungry. Well, can you tell us a little bit more about sort of the storytelling and narrative aspects of the game in regards to the financial literacy? I think we'd love to hear that.
Yes, about the narrative. So basically, each of the characters has a financial issue. So, for example, one of those characters is like a grandma, and she doesn't have a retirement savings plan. So she has some struggles, and she teaches that to her granddaughter.
Mm-hmm.
And her granddaughter has to create her own plan. So the player has to find some papers on the map, and each of them is a different savings plan. And then according to her, so for example, she can take higher risks, and she's young, so she could have a savings plan that has more risk and she has more time to recover if it goes down. So the player has to find the correct one, and yeah.
Great. I'm going to keep going. So obviously different countries have different financial institutions and tools. How transferable is the game to other countries?
Well, it really depends on the topics that the characters have.
Okay.
So one of the characters, I talked about gambling, so I think that's global.
Mm-hmm.
I talked about the risks and so on. I also talked about budgeting. So I think if it would go to another country, I think the financial topics, would have to be changed, because obviously we don't have the same retirement plans as USA or in a different country. Mm-hmm. But the same mechanics, I think, could apply, because people really liked being a detective, mm-hmm. like searching a map, finding characters. So I think that mechanic really works for adults. Because yes, this was also a concern, mm-hmm. to have a game where adults wanted to play and would be engaged. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right, well, one more round of applause, please, and maybe good luck on the defense.
Thank you.
All right, before we break for lunch, I know we're all starving. Thank you for your patience. I have been asked to remind everyone that we will be voting for best papers, short, long, and student. And the proceedings were sent this morning through WhatsApp. And so please take a moment and just look at the papers that you are considering. Oftentimes, this is a vote on best presentation. So please go and look at the papers and see what people have written, so that we can really celebrate the great work that is being presented at the conference. And one more thing.
Two more things before going for lunch. One is that right now there is going to be the online grad commission launch. So for the grad commission members that want to join online, you can find the link on Discord. You probably also received an email with the instructions, so please join. And second, we have our workshop, on-site workshop after lunch. It's gonna be in a different building. It's gonna be in building J, so we can just move together towards the workshop. Unfortunately, the online workshop was canceled for this evening, so we will only have the on-site workshop led by our colleague Alejandro. He's there. So let's have lunch. We're gonna also go to a different place to have lunch, so let's go all together. Thank you. And you can leave your stuff here. No, because we are not coming back. We're not coming back here, so take your stuff. Thank you all.